Hey everybody, welcome to the Whole Church Podcast. And if you're like, whoa, this isn't Wednesday. Yeah, that's right. This is a bonus episode. We're plugging an awesome book, Amipotence. I forget the subtitle because for some reason, of all the things I thought important to write down. J Patty, help me out. What's the subtitle on this? He's literally holding the books.
You got two of them. So volume 1 is support and criticism. Volume 2 is expansion and application.
Okay, so I did write down the subtitle. I just thought those were notes for myself and not the subtitle. All right, cool. We're going to talk about that. It is in response to Dr. Thomas J. Oord, who I was told to only say that once, so there we are. He is a doctor. He wrote a book, The Death of Omnipotence, The Birth of Amipotence, where he argued that omnipotence is over with. We don't need that doctrine anymore. And then he came up with one that he thought was better, Amipotence. We've talked about that before on the show. I think I have like a playlist of just Dr. Thomas J. Oord episodes. So the Tom playlist will be below if you guys want to catch up. Because we have limited time, and I don't want to waste it talking about stuff that you guys can just go pick up and read. So buy that book, buy the Amipotence books. I am not just joined by Tom, though. His two books are a collection of essays where people are responding to him as either criticism or support or expansion or application. I think we have everything here except for, is it application that we're missing? Is that the only one? Because I know J. Patty, I think yours was expansion, right? I know Nick was support, and I know Aaron was criticism. All right. Well, I am here with Nick Polk, who you know from our Christmas episode and many other episodes. If you follow Systematic Ecology, you know that we're starting a Nick Polk cult, so please sign up today.
Worship me.
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard that yet, but for some reason it started as a joke and it just keeps growing. So you're part of an ongoing bit now.
I definitely embody omnipotence, so I'm definitely worthy of it.
Well, part of this, I'm going to have rules for a little game we're going to do later, and Nick's going to be in charge of seeing them through because he is omnipotent. And if you have problems with how he criticizes you, well, take it up with him. He's the all-powerful one. But I have Nick Polk here, Tolkien scholar, writes Tolkien Pop Substack, Tolkien, Middle Earth, Nick. We're also here with J. Patty. You know what's so funny is, like, in my mind, his credentials is smart guy like beer. Like, I just know that he reads more than humanly possible. And someone one day is going to write a book on how he reads that much and also how he drinks that much beer and stays this skinny. Those are the two things that are self-contradictory. That Aaron Simmons is going to write a philosophy book on why Josh Patterson isn't possible. Speaking of Aaron Simmons, you guys know him from literally the last 2 episodes. He did an episode, we invited for a roundtable, and then we were like, oh, wait a minute. You did an essay with Dr. Oord, or sorry, Tom's book as well. I'm going to have to get used to this. So we have Dr. Aaron Simmons with us. Do you also prefer me call you Tom, or?
you can call me Tom. Okay. Aaron's fine too, though, so you pick.
Okay. Yeah. So today I am in the presence of greatness. So I'll try and do a little less talking than usual and let these guys talk. Since we have some of the essays, we have the guy who wrote the original book who put this together. This is going to be a fun one. TJ wants me to plug things because he always wants me to plug things. Just read the show notes, do stuff that helps us. There you go. And as always, I'll cut the Bible, but I won't cut the silly question from our bonus. So we are going to get silly here today because it's my favorite form of unity. So we have to do a silly question. And it's a quick, easy one. Just one or the other. You guys let me know. Would you rather go on a hike with Daffy Duck or Donald Duck? I will go first. I'm going to say Donald Duck because I just have a lot of angry people in my life already. So, like, Daffy Duck, kind of a chaos factor I don't know how to deal with. I don't know how to deal with anger. I'm just around it pretty regularly, so I'm like, I can handle that. And I think his voice is funny. So the madder he gets, the funnier I'll find him. Aaron, if you had to go on a hike with Daffy Duck or Donald, who are you going with?
I'm going with Daffy just because I think it would add a element of chaos to the hike, which might be kind of compelling. So prepare for anything.
All right. I dig it. J. Patty, where are you going?
Yeah, I think I would have to go with Donald because Daffy's always being hunted by Elmer Fudd, and I do all that I can. As a general life rule, I avoid getting shot at. So I'm gonna go with
Well,
Donald Duck.
I mean, I'm
Less
literally
venomous.
moving homes for that exact reason. So I feel I feel you. Tom, if you had to go on a hike with Daffy Duck or Donald, who are you going with?
I'm with Aaron. I think I want to go with Daffy because I want something interesting, and the chaos would add some interest.
Yeah. Well, this wasn't staged, just so you guys know. But the tiebreaker will be the one and only leader of the Nick Polk cult, omniscient Nick. What is the correct answer?
You know, I'm going to break the tie here, and I'm going to go with Daffy because I was more of a Looney Tunes person.
Man, I
than
was
a
wrong.
Disney person growing up, and Donald's voice actually kind of annoying to me. I think that's probably probably a not popular take, but you know, I think Daffy's funnier too. So there you go.
Daffy is funny. That's true. I think I've seen Daffy Duck fight Mike Tyson once. I haven't seen Donald do that yet. So there's that.
Or play basketball.
Yeah, true. Yeah. I knew I could trust Nick. All right, Tom, I'm going to start this by throwing it to you since this is all in response to something you did. You caused all of this. So could you just kind of remind our listeners, what is amipotence? What are we even here to talk about? Let's just start with, what is this?
In a nutshell, amipotence is a word to describe God's uncontrolling love. It's an alternative to omnipotence, which has been understood in a bunch of different ways in the Christian tradition. But oftentimes, omnipotence has been understood as either God controlling absolutely everything, sometimes called theological determinism, or the idea that God could and perhaps sometimes does control things, but other times lets people use their free will or randomness in the world. Amipotence says that love comes first in God's nature, and love is inherently uncontrolling, and therefore God simply can't control anyone or anything, not just free will creatures, but anything from quarks to quasars. God loves it all, but can't control any of it. Now, this is not a God who is watching us from a distance as some sort of deistic God, uninvolved. I think God is still has maximal power, the most powerful force in the universe. It's just that God can be the most powerful force and yet be unable to control others. How's that?
Okay. All right. I think that's a good summation from what I can tell. I'm still going to leave it to you because now this is something I would never do. You've put yourself in the hot seat, right? Like here's all these different people talking about something that you did, right? like for me personally, I'm like, how can I, I like podcasting and all, but I just I want it to be about the other people. So I interview other people and I'm like, hey, let's talk about them. And I'm like, let's not make it about me so much. Cause I'm dumb. I don't know if anyone's caught on to that yet, but for you though, you're here surrounded by people who are here to either praise you or criticize you or uplift you or challenge you. And you put yourself in the hot seat. Why?
Well, I think there's lots of reasons, but two come quickly to mind. One, the idea of amipotence has been really helpful to me and really helpful to lots of other people. And, I happen to be a Christian who wants to live a life of love, and that often involves helping people. And so one motive is to be helpful. Another motive is that I don't feel like I have all the answers in life, and I'm open to criticism. I want to improve my ideas, and so to offer my ideas to those who disagree. I don't expect to convince everybody, but it could be that sometimes their disagreements might reveal some new information to me. So one of my motives is actually to learn from people.
Man, I like that. Well, with that then, I'm going to do a bit of a game. We're going to do something similar to our actually it's not patent, but it technically is trademarked, our speed round on the Whole Church podcast. And what we're going to do, sorry, I'm kind of strolling through trying to find the speed round music here. I am going to give everybody a chance, other than Tom, since you did the least amount of writing. I feel like you did the intro, but all you did was sum up the book. So instead of having all 80 authors on, I was like, who are the ones that are like my friends and the ones that I like? No, I like a lot of the other authors too. I shouldn't say it like that. I'm bad. Anyway, but I have Josh, Nick, and Aaron here. We're going to discuss what you guys contributed to the book in speed round fashion. So instead of giving you a sentence for a bunch of different questions, I'm going to give you 3 sentences. Nick is going to be the judge, even of himself. He's omnipotent. It's fine. To say whether or not these are actually 3 sentences. Actually, you know what? We'll do 3.5. Nick will cut you off if you do that 4th sentence halfway through. He'll just verbally including to himself. He'll burn himself. I think I trust Nick for that.
This is
Actually, I have an air horn.
So I'm
if you throw your hand up, I'll use the air horn. I think I like that. That's a fun version of this. Here's what the air horn sounds like for people on YouTube. All right. So there we go. I'm going to make Josh go first. In 3 sentences, Josh, how are you describing what you contributed to Amipotence? You were on expansion and application.
Yeah, so I wanted to challenge myself to not just agree with Tom. And so I took a deconstructive philosophical theologian, John Caputo, and put him in conversation with a constructive philosophical theologian, namely Tom Oord, and tried to do some kind of radical affirmation of omnipotence. So radical theology and process theology together. That's what I did.
Quick question. Did you say omnipotence or amipotence when you said affirmation of?
Amipotence, sorry.
Yeah. They sound similar. It's easier to read than pronounce.
Yeah, I suck at saying them. Like, I feel like I'm never
me
going to
too.
get it right. And yeah, but that's what I try to do.
All right. Nick, let you go up and make sure, remember, flag yourself if you go over that 3.5 sentences.
I just need to use a lot of ands, and I'll be good, I think. I do a lot of pop culture stuff, and I was particularly interested in using Tom's concept of omnipotence to analyze certain pop cultural IPs. And I primarily did that through analyzing superhero IPs and demonstrating that these superhero IPs show a decline in the confidence of not just omnipotence, but also other forms of dominative and determinative power, and how these IPs actually conceive those things as fraudulent, and therefore omnipotence in pop culture.
No one's been flagged yet. Aaron, I throw it to you. I trust you to get flagged so I can use the air horn. I'm just dying to use it.
So, to everybody, I'm a philosopher, so I will present what I did very philosophically. Tom's argument depends on a disjunctive syllogism, whereby either omnipotence or amnipotence is true. Omnipotence, he claims, is incoherent. Therefore, amnipotence is true. I show, I think, with a lot of reasons, why he is wrong in his critique of omnipotence, at least in all its forms, and therefore his conclusions fail.
Then Aaron used another sentence. There we go. Sorry,
Nice.
I'm a child. I didn't know if y'all knew that when I invited you on. But yeah, I'm a child. Oh, all right, good stuff. Unfortunately, I've read most of Volume 1. I haven't finished it, so I haven't bought Volume 2 yet. I forced J Patty to send me his essay because I'm like, I need to read this before we talk about it. And it's crazy because I've read everyone else's writing here because I follow Tom and Aaron's Substack, and Nick's, but I also have Nick's book. I was just going to plug your book again because I like plugging it. But like, I've also read Aaron's book twice now. Because one was audiobook and I still count that as reading it. But I think the thing though, like I pick up J Patty, like I've never heard him write before. Like I've been in a truck with him getting beer and I know he makes like dick jokes a lot. I was like, this will be interesting. And then I like one paragraph in and I'm like, oh God, like I had to like breathe and be like, my brain wasn't ready for this kind of intensity with like just how you structured your sentences and stuff. And I'm like, okay, this is like a like scholar power up. Like he did like the Mario 1-up thing, and I'm like, okay, cool. So for those who don't know, J Patty's an amazing writer. I mean, all of these people are, but if you didn't know about J Patty specifically, now you know. Tom, since I haven't finished this set yet, do you in volume 2 at the end, do you do any like response to any of this, or is it just kind of like you let it be?
I let it be in these volumes because I thought responding to each essayist would make this an even longer book
Yeah.
that's already too long.
Yeah, that would be
But
insane. But I'd be here
yeah,
for it.
but the plan is that in the coming year, I'm going to write responses to every essay. They're going to be placed online and then shared through social media to then, push the conversation out. So I'll give a written response to all three of the folks you've invited here, and I'm not going. I'm going to obviously have to put limits on how long I can make those responses, but I do think it's important for me to respond to not only the praise and the expansion and the application, but also the criticism to see where I think strong points are made and weak points and all that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. So I had two different ideas what to do here. So Tom, since this is your book, I'm going to let you choose either or you could decide that I'm giving you a false dichotomy. Not that that's my criticism of you. It might be, but and choose both if you want. My two ideas, because I'm a bad podcaster, it turns out. Was either you could do a speed round where you give a couple sentences of response to each of their essays here, or I'll say and if you want. I actually have one sentence response to all of them, including your own thing that I wrote down. That's very inefficient because it's one sentence. But whatever you think would open up the conversation best, let's.
How
I'm
about
down
if
for it.
I give a very quick response to each one of them, and then they can respond because
I like
your
that.
their opening comments were intentionally kept very short, and I know they're eager, so they're here. Let's let
Yeah,
them expand some. So
yeah,
I'll go in the order that you started. So Josh is drawing from John Caputo or Jack Caputo's work on radical theology. He notes rightly that Jack is very wary of metaphysics, as many radical theologians, maybe even all radical theologians are. And one of, I think, Jack Caputo's most significant contributions to the discussion has been what he calls a weak God. Now, this weak God stands in contrast to the kind of omnipotent God that I'm also wanting to reject. But I think that there's value in saying God is strong rather than weak. So I make arguments about God being maximally powerful, to use that language, and I do so in part because I think the Christian wants hope that love will eventually be accepted and pervasive in the universe, and I think that involves activity and some degree of power. So I still want a powerful God, even if not an omnipotent and controlling one. So how would you respond to that, Josh?
Yeah, I guess maybe it would be helpful as if I could give like some of the background as to why I have found Caputo helpful and why I wanted to put him in conversation with you. Um, so for me personally, I think I'm pretty sure most of us here would agree that we don't necessarily get to choose what we believe. It's like hard for us to opt to do that. And for me, more recently, there are days when it is easier for me to believe in God than not. And so radical theology has kind of been something that I kind of fell into to still operate within kind of the Christian language and tradition, even on days when maybe my ability to posit, God is less or
Yeah,
non-existent. And so it also, I think it provides a helpful balance. Like it there's some humility involved in, I agree with you, Tom. Most days I consider myself a process thinker. And so I'm fine with those things. I want to believe those things, and make the big metaphysical claims and say that there's a God and God is love and all that kind of stuff. But on days when I'm struggling to believe that, radical theology can be something to fall into and also keep me humble because it does ditch the metaphysics, like you were talking about. And so, but also I noticed that even though Caputo doesn't posit an ontological being called God, and you do, the conclusions, if we take your work and Caputo's work seriously, how we live our life is pretty similar because it still necessitates human cooperation, either giving into the divine lure, in your case, where there is God, or actualizing the divine call, um, as Caputo would say. Like, it still necessitates us active and participating to bring about goodness in the world. So, I don't know if that's much of a response, but that's kind of
Yeah, that's
all
good.
that was going on in my head when I was writing.
Josh, you want me to respond to the other Josh, or should I go on to Nick next?
Let's go in order, and then
Okay,
I'll do a little rant, and then we'll just open up and see where the conversation goes. I think.
great. I enjoyed Nick's essay too. In his particular case, I thought what was most valuable is the way he is illustrating some of the worries that I have of omnipotence by bringing up these various characters, and the way they're described in 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 the fiction that he's exploring. I As I read Nick's stuff, I said to myself, Nick and I are on the same page here, but he knows a whole lot more about pop culture than I do, and he can make applications where I never could. So I didn't really have any, not that I had big problems with what Josh wrote, but with Nick, I felt like, yeah, that's good stuff, and that'll probably preach better to some audiences than what I'm trying to say. Nick, how does that strike you?
No, I think you articulated it well, and just obviously getting into different nerdy areas, that you might not be as familiar with. But one of the things that really struck me is just like the political implications of the way people
Mm,
usually think of omnipotence.
hmm
And what I thought about too is like the David Bentley Hart forms of omnipotence, or like these other things that people talk about, like the Freedom 4 type of stuff.
hmm
I don't think that's generally like pop understanding of God's power. I think people are like,
hmm
God's in control, things happen for a reason, etc. And then you're like, cool, but what about like God committing genocide in the Old Testament? And they're like, it's God's ways. I think that's generally the vibes. But I
Yeah.
think in pop culture we see that this idea, like especially looking at like Carl Schmitt, but like seeing how that stuff is internalized by using his theology and Tom's critique of omnipotence as like a lens on different elements of pop culture. Like people are very skeptical of that. And so if people are familiar with Marvel, right, especially the MCU, it's all about like kind of, at first it's like, oh, this is awesome, special effects, explosions. And then they're like, maybe the Avengers shouldn't have all that unchecked power, and it's actually very damaging to the world. And so it's wrestling with that. And so, and I talk about that through a bunch of different other superhero IPs that are extremely popular, if not the most popular forms of media being consumed on a global scale, to be like, yeah, this form of unchecked, all determining power um, is not helpful, and also it's not real, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
of the things that, I don't know the Marvel Universe anything like you do, but I don't know of any Marvel character or any comic book character who is described as literally omnipresent. Um, and that is one of the problems that I think we face with sort of the God. I happen to believe God is literally omnipresent, or I like to say universal. Um, and if you add that omnipotence to that, then there's all kinds of questions about, well, God was there, God could have stopped it. Whereas in the Marvel comic, Marvel characters, Superman's only one place in one time, or maybe a few places at one time. And so I think the omnipotence problems for the Marvel characters are there, but they're exacerbated if you add some of the other attributes of God to a person, like omnipresence.
The nerd in
Yeah.
me is dying to speak to this, but I'm
Oh,
gonna let it be.
is there an omnipresent Marvel character?
Kind of. The
Okay.
Watchers are everywhere, can interact, and then choose not to. And there's a lot of moral quandaries that Marvel wrestles with
Yeah,
that deals with
especially
that.
when that's a
So
plural that can be everywhere.
yeah,
But anyway, I
yeah.
won't
The
get into
Watchers are
that.
weird. I don't understand them either.
All right, should I go on to Aaron then? Aaron kind of gave an overview of the kind of argument he gives in his essay. He doesn't get into the particulars. So I think before I respond to him, I think I'm going to let him sort of be more specific so our listeners can hear what his sort of specific beefs are. So Aaron,
Yeah,
why don't
I
you
like that.
talk and then I'll respond.
No worries. I used to have a student who, as we teach, which, Tom, you and I do a lot, like we often will say, so any questions or comments about what I've just said? And I used to have a student who said that I should always add questions, comments, or legitimate beefs, which now has made its way into my pedagogy quite substantially.
That's good.
So here's the thing. Tom's critique of omnipotence shows up in three big moves, one having to do with evil, one having to do with biblical sources, and one having to do with what you basically refer to as like philosophical qualifications, and these philosophical ideas attending what is meant by omnipotence. So we were given very tight word limits for this book. And so what I did is focus just on the philosophical qualifications idea. And Tom's claim is, look, omnipotence only works if it is an unqualified designator. And then goes on to say that there are, I think you number 49 different qualifications that are frequently offered in the philosophical literature. And so if you've got all these qualifications, then the very idea of omnipotence becomes either incoherent or maybe even self-contradictory, because we necessitate qualifying the unqualifiable. And that, on the surface, right, seems like a really, really good way to criticize a concept if the concept is internally incoherent, or if it requires to be meaningful the thing that would then make it incoherent. It seems like a disaster of a philosophical idea. And so Tom's argument is that's the case with omnipotence. My response is to then say, even to define omnipotence, we have to engage in qualification. And so therefore, qualification is not the problem. Precise definitions are required. And so what Tom calls qualifications, I show these are just what philosophers do all the time when they are precising the concepts so that they are very wary of straw manning ideas. And so the upshot then becomes, look, the critique of omnipotence is actually a critique of very specific versions of omnipotence that, for what it's worth, most free will theists and open theists, where I identify myself, have already critiqued those very specific versions. And so Tom sort of expanding outward all conceptions of omnipotence face this same problem is either just overextended and therefore falls flat, or it gives into its own incoherence by saying this idea is unqualified, but the idea that's unqualified, he already had to qualify in order to make that claim about it, right? So I'm kind of using Tom's critique and flowing it back onto his own argument.
Excellent. Thanks.
Yeah.
And Aaron's not the only one to raise this particular concern. And I think there's
Tasker,
something
Bassinger, Rhoda,
yeah.
Muller, like there's a group of us.
Yeah.
We none of us read each other's papers. Like this is important. And so
Yeah,
I think all of us were
exactly.
like, how can I say something? Oh shoot, David's writing for this one. Alan, all right, what are they likely to say? How can I make sure mine maybes? So there's a lot of like touching on each other without wanting to do what they did. So you're right.
Yeah, Austin Pounds was one of those two. I actually really liked his essay. It was kind of similar vein, not exactly the same, obviously.
Yeah, so I think one of the strengths of Aaron's arguments is to remind us that any kind of word that we might use has to have qualifications, provisos, explanations, that includes words about God. And that will strike some people as kind of odd. In fact, I'm in the midst of writing a systematic theology, which I've been reading lots of theologians, and they have this tendency to want to be exaggeratively praising God by sort of leaping or heaping uh, infinities upon God, so God is even more amazing than ever. And at the end of the day, I think, well, I don't think that's a coherent view. In fact, I call this, I don't know if you guys did this as a kid, but like if you ever got in an argument with someone and you said, my dad's stronger than your dad. Oh, yeah. Well, my dad's 10 times taller than, oh, yeah. And then someone would say, my dad's infinity times stronger, which is a kind of like, that's a conversation stopper. Where do you go with that? Because who knows what that means? And I
Yeah.
think that's rampant, not just among people in the pews, but amongst the most celebrated theologians in history. And so, one of the things I think we have to do, and I think as Aaron rightly said, many people in the open and relational community are doing this, is we have to say, okay, now what precisely do we mean here? Yes, our words will never give us absolute truth on things, but can we be a little more precise instead of just throwing these, exaggerated words out? What do we mean? So when it comes to omnipotence, um, the major Christian theologians, not just in the open and relational community, they've been saying, "Oh, yes, God is omnipotent, but we don't mean this. We don't mean that." These usually they're either logical qualifications or provisos. God can't make a round circle, or I mean a round square, or God can't make 1 + 1 = 387, or their claims about God's nature, that if God could do that, it would be somehow to deny God's self. Now, um, I think we should keep those two separate, by the way, Aaron. Bill Hasker wants to combine those two, but I think they're separate. And the
And I
reason I
argue
think we
they're
ought
the
to,
same as well, right? So I think
yeah,
all of the qualifications are ultimately logical incompatibility statements. It's just that we're saying what's
good, yeah,
logically the case about God's nature. So yeah, I agree with Bill on that.
yeah. Here's why I don't like that move. Um, I don't like it because, as you know, as an open theist, you have certain claims about God's nature that you don't share with, let's say, a classical Calvinist. And so, what's logically implied in the sort of presuppositions you bring to the table, they're going to be different logical implications for the Calvinists. So, I think we can't just sort of, I mean, like 1 + 1 can't equal 387. I think we can all get on board with that. But God's relation to time, no, you and I are going to start from a different place than our most of the rest of the Christians. So I think we do have to, maybe there are end up being logical implications, but they're predicated on metaphysical assumptions. Anyway, now we're getting into all kinds of nerdy stuff, but um, let
Yeah.
me back up, and my last response to Aaron would be this. I definitely think Aaron is right, and some other people in this book, that one could continue to use the word omnipotent and call God omnipotent if that person did their dead level best to explain what they mean by that word. I, however, think that in 99.9% of instances, people don't do that. And even amongst the greatest theologians in history, like Augustine and Aquinas, and I have uh, uh, quotes to back this up, the language they use can lead one to think that by omnipotent they mean one of the three views of omnipotence that I reject. So maybe my difference with Aaron, if we really got down to it, has to do with the strategy of language more than some real substantial differences. Um, and my strategy is that the word omnipotent isn't salvageable, and I think Aaron thinks it is. Is that fair, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean the thing I think that is absolutely right about that is there are many uses, and I think Nick, you said this too. Many uses of omnipotence, especially in kind of broader, layperson culture, that then spills over into the Jesus take the wheel kind of meme stuff, right? That can be anchored in passages of Augustine, right? I mean, so it's not that there's not this radical disconnect between these serious thinkers and this cultural understanding. The problem is that cultural understanding is so dangerous, so problematic itself, leads to real harm in people's lives. And so I fully agree, and I start my essay by saying this, fully agree with Tom about the reasons we should be wary of some of these views. And then I would say our disagreement about language, I definitely think is right. I would then probably go a little bit further and say, I'm going to land a little bit closer to the idea that it's not just possible for a loving God to exert absolute control over non-free will beings, but it might be required. So I do think there's a substantive difference, and that I would just say is the difference between what I would describe as a kind of full-throated open theism versus what I think yours is a kind of process-leaning relational theism, and that difference is a difference that I think matters. But it's a in-house difference, right? I once actually, Josh was talking about Jack Caputo, mutual friend. Jack and I once were at a conference together, and we were doing papers kind of responding to each other. And I said, I think mine was called something like, what's at stake in the 1% or something. And the idea was he and I agree on like 99% of stuff, but that 1% I think is really worth like thinking carefully about. He thinks if we disagree on the 1%, we're out on 99. Like we can't have this disagreement and still be at the same table. And I think he's wrong, right? I think he's wrong about the particulars of a weak God. But that difference is one internal to a very shared critique of the excesses of what he calls strong theology, that Tom and I would maybe describe as meticulous providence articulated within a theological determinism and a neo-Calvinist frame. Heck yeah, we're at the same table doing the same stuff. And then these disagreements at the table are where, for me, all the fun starts happening.
Yeah, which, the whole church podcast wouldn't exist if we didn't think that we could disagree about that 1%. So there's that. Had to plug the church unity bit in so people know why we're doing this, because I don't think I mentioned that at the beginning. I just started doing it. But I did have a few thoughts that kind of go along with this part of the conversation we've been having. I think for me, some of the problem, and it kind of pulls from both Aaron and Josh's essays, where it's like by qualifying it, you're immediately kind of disqualifying. You know what I mean? Like that very statement is problematic. Or what Josh talked about is how like we're conditioning the unconditional, kind of pulling from Caputo. And for me, a lot of that really resonated with me when I'm reading. I'm like, that makes perfect sense. And I think my biggest thing that I guess maybe I'm just confused about, because I mentioned earlier, I'm a little bit dumb. It's fine. But I think the thing that confuses me is like, it almost seems like we're talking about different categories. Like we're replacing omnipotence with amipotence. And like in my brain, it's like we're talking about, is a raging fire or a raging river stronger? And it's kind of like, well, they're both really powerful, but like, it's a different kind, right? And I almost feel like what we're talking about with God is we're talking about like his agency. We're talking about his characteristic, not necessarily his power level. You know what I mean? like I think that's where a little bit of the disconnect is. Like amipotence sounds like we're describing the kind of power it is and not the degree of power, whereas omnipotence seems like it's talking about the degree of power. And it's almost like these two things for me, I'm like, well, how are they? You know what I mean? Like I get your thing about the controlling, but there's
really
lots
good
of different
argument.
ways that I could put that together without it being that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think that's a really important case, and I think actually maybe even all three of the other people on this will agree with what I say here. The kind of power we think God has makes a whale of a difference,
Oh
and
yeah.
I think all of us here reject the notion that God has the kind of power that controls absolutely everything. If that's a all-determining kind of power, then I think
Yeah.
we would reject that. Now, that doesn't mean we agree on exactly what kind of power. I'm also going to guess that Josh, Aaron, and Nick would want to say something like I'm saying by saying that God's power is the power of love. I mean, they all care about love just like I do. My worry is that many people who say God's power is the power of love continue to think God has the ability to do things like single-handedly prevent evil, and then that sort of works them into certain conceptual corners and makes them angry at God or think God really isn't loving after all. So I'm in with Amipotence. I'm trying to more carefully describe this kind of power that I think God has. And maybe I don't do as good a job as I could, but that's my attempt to in
Yeah.
this work.
Yeah. So I'm going to word my follow up in a way that includes Nick's essay, because Nick talks a lot about Homelander from The Boys, right? Who is like Superman but bad. And the whole concept of The Boys is that power does corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and it's something I mostly think I agree with, which is a big problem for this omnipotence thing, right? Like if I think that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and I'm saying that God is all powerful, doesn't that also mean I'm saying he's all corrupt? Like he is the most corrupted then. But I think the problem is, maybe not the problem, but the thing that I struggle with here, when the Boys presents his argument, the answer is, let's go kill that guy. Right? Like, let's just be rid of the evil being. Not, oh, well, what if we just turned Homelander into a loving Homelander? Yeah, I think maybe that's my disconnect too, is like a little bit of like, well, why even hold on to this God concept then? You know what I mean? Like when I hear your argument of like, for me, because Nick mentioned Colbert, there is a level of like, okay, death. Without death, we can't really have attachment or love, and you have a lot of that in like Lao Tzu's teachings. I get that, but then it's stuff like sexual assault happens, and I'm like, well, I think we could have a healthy sex life without sexual assault existing in the world. And then you present your argument, and I'm like, that makes perfect sense. But then you jump to this conclusion of, so God must not be all powerful. And my brain goes, well, wouldn't it be easier to just say, so then not God? I do believe in God, but I guess how do you address that part? Like, wouldn't it be easier to just let go of God?
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in here, but if Nick wants to jump in too, that's great. I do think that's a common response, Josh, and not just to my particular view of God's power, but kind of the general open and relational view in general. Even if you are an open and relational person, you want to affirm omnipotence like Aaron does. There is still, I think, the question from someone who assumes God is all controlling of like, well, why do you need that God if that God is going to fix every problem that we have in the world? And my response to that is that God's function in the world is far more than simply a matter of controlling things. Obviously, I don't think God can control,
Yeah.
but I think our sense of morality, our sense of beauty is tied to this. I think our sense of justice is tied to belief in God. So there's all kinds of other, I think the goad toward what's quote better finds its source in this divine being of love. And we can't make good sense of our lives if we don't posit this kind of thing. Not that I know this to be absolutely true, that I don't think
Yeah.
it's a proof, but I think it's a better way to think of reality.
So you
Nick,
would say
that's
God
coming
maybe.
out. I do say God maybe. I don't say God
Yeah.
for sure as if I'm certain, but I think it's a stronger God maybe than God maybe not.
Yeah. Just had to do a nod at Josh's essay too. Include them all.
Yeah, I
Nick?
think, I'm even thinking about like how we just so accept these concepts of heroes like Superman, who's like near omnipotent in this way, or even I talk about Goku from Dragon Ball Z for those who like that sort of thing. And we just accept that everything they do is the right thing. And that's the question in itself, is like, it's the quality of them. We don't go, oh, Superman's great because he has all these powers. We go, oh, he's great because he uses them well, or in Goku too. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of collateral damage that these heroes do, and they also kind of hold inherently like sorts of propaganda that are negative. There's inherent like Japanese nationalism that's in Goku, as well as like American/Christian nationalism in a lot of Superman renditions. And so, I think the difference is that, like, obviously, Superman can't be everywhere and all knowing, and neither can Homelander. But I think we need to be able to like reimagine, because I think especially when it comes to God, I think it's really difficult or not possible to divide omnipotence from omniscience. And that's one of my biggest things, is that like I'm really not convinced by like Molinism, because I know that's kind of a strategy. But I think that like if God is all powerful, either God limits God's knowledge or is just omniscient. I'm trying to think of the best way to put this, but I think we just have to be able to reimagine like what God may be like, as well as like our heroes, which is reflected, kind of in pop culture, etc.
Yeah. Man.
Nick, your when I was reading your essay, I was reminded, because I really liked the collateral damage bit you did, and I was reminded of like the movie Team America, where the opening scene in that is that there's a terrorist that's going to blow up Paris and like take out the Eiffel Tower, and then like here comes America, they come in and they shoot everything up and they stop the terrorist, but like they destroy Paris in the process, and they're like, yes, we did it, we saved the day and stopped the terrorists, but also like they destroyed the place while doing it. And so like I liked your, that's like a helpful way to think in my mind, but that came to front of the brain.
I should mention too, Joshua, Noel, the basic challenge that you are offering is one that John Sanders and I articulate together in an essay we wrote called A Goldilocks God. And we use Caputo, Josh Patterson, as like one pole that we think goes too far, because like, let's just talk about love and justice and beauty. It'd be so much easier without the God talk, right? And so we actually use his as an example of, if we give into what we call apophatic excess, the God talk we would do better without it. And so we're trying to like show that as, man, if we're trying to think about God, this forces us in a direction that might actually be hampered by all of this theological baggage. But then in the other direction, we say cataphatic excess is the kind of apologetics enterprise ink with lots of determinism, infused, such that God becomes so articulate and so known and circumscribed by human cognitive categories that ultimately there's not anything left that would be godlike there, right? All we've ended up with is just a kind of, imagination of human ponderings, right? And so that distinction between a cataphatic and an apophatic excess leads us to argue for a kind of openness theism in a broadly postmodern epistemic way, in order to try to maintain the rationale for the God talk as substantive, right? And again, John and I are both theological personalists, and so like there's a reason to maintain this, but what we're maintaining is now couched within and understood among a kind of postmodern humility and awareness of this perspectival temptation that almost always will outstrip our abilities to know, right? And so a Goldilocks God was our attempt, Josh, to try to answer, why do we keep talking about God, and what are some options that should stop?
I knew for a fact when I had all of you guys on that I was going to leave with more books to read somehow. Man, I've got about 5 minutes left, so this was only a taste of what this conversation could have been, and I hate that for our listeners, but that just means you need to pick up the book. Or both books, volume 1 and 2, Amipotence, Support and Criticism, Omnipotence, Expansion and Application. But I have a comment and a question. I'll do the comment first. If you want to know what I'm probably closest to, is that Austin Pounds essay is probably where I closest lean. And he pulls, because, naturally he pulls the C.S. Lewis definition of omnipotence being kind of this idea that God can, I'm missing the word, actualize all things, not that God can actually do anything. And I like that definition, but I don't think that means that you can't have omnipotence at the same time. Because again, I think it's difference of degree and kind. So I think you could have both potentially. Okay, that is just where I'm standing. My last question is kind of a comment on myself as well. I don't know who I want to throw this to first. I'm just going to say it and then see who responds. I think that works. For me personally, in the last year, I finally stopped using the word inerrancy because just like what Tom says in his book, like there's that death of 1,000 qualifications. I kept, I was like, completely inerrant. And then people were like, well, what about this thing in the Bible? Okay. I'm like, well, inerrant, but you also have to understand the genre. And then it was inerrant, but you understand the genre. And sometimes it's not the object that's the truth. It's the subject that's truth. And I kept qualifying it. And then eventually I'm talking to Pete Inns and he's like, yeah, it's more like a sliding bar. And at some point you just drop the word. And I was like, well, I had to swallow that pill and drop the word. And when I dropped the word, I had to make some other changes theologically that were important changes that I weren't able to do until I dropped that word. So I think for me, what's interesting that Tom's doing is it's almost less of a theological argument in a lot of ways and more of a linguistics argument. But I think the consequences of that linguistic argument can be really profound theologically. So I guess the question would be for, especially those who are criticizing this, how is this different from, first, how is this different from just a linguistic argument? And then second, if we're able to drop other words because of things like that, trigger warning, we don't say fag anymore because of what people have started using it as, even though the English definition is still going to be like a pile of sticks or cigarette bud. You know what I mean? So if we're able to drop other words because of these qualifications, why wouldn't we drop this? And then also, how is this not just a linguistic issue? I know that's a lot for a quick answer for somebody, but here we go.
I want to pile on.
Perfect.
In a few books ago, several books ago, I argued that God was almighty, which many people think is a synonym for omnipotent. I didn't use the word omnipotent, but I used the word almighty. And I did so, but I tried to be precise. I said God is mightier than all others, has no equal. God exerts might upon all others. God's a necessary cause in the becoming of every entity. And God is the source of might for others. So God is empowering one for all creation. I could say all three of those and not say God controls. So I said, well, God is almighty. Then the Bible got in the way because I found out that word almighty is a mistranslation of the Hebrew and Greek words. And so now I no longer had the biblical impetus to use the word almighty either. And that was part of me shifting to amipotence as a new word. So that's kind of supporting your case in terms of how we choose our words and why.
I like that. Any other comments there?
Well, Josh, that I said this on the two episodes ago or whenever this will air.
Like an episode and a half.
I have abandoned the term evangelical as a self-description of my own identity.
Yeah.
Despite still attending an Assemblies of God church. And the reason is because of what it meant to so many people. And so I think, in fact, the best argument for rethinking omnipotence is the cultural assumptions that carries with it being the kind of omnipotence that most substantive, I would say serious, philosophers working in the field have already given good reasons to abandon. So that's not what we mean by the term, and yet that's what it's so often meant, which leads me to just the caveat that I know Tom wrestles with. I wrestle with it. But it's something in some ways, and Tom, I'll be critical of you in a different sense here. But as I say in the book, it's because we are friends of virtue, my man. It's because I love what you're doing and yet contest some of it. Those of us who have both the kind of training and then the background in speaking to a very narrow professional audience, when we start writing for a broader audience, it can be unbelievably difficult to maintain the kind of precision that you would be expected to articulate within a professional audience, because that will lose all the readership, right? And so, like when I wrote Camping with Kierkegaard, I was expecting Kierkegaardians to come at me and be like, this is bonkers, right? You didn't explain this. And there's all these secondaries. Why aren't you citing? But the difference was when I wrote Camping with Kierkegaard, I tried really, really, really hard not to in any sense position this as some sort of contribution to the scholarship on Kierkegaard, right? It wasn't meant as a critique of a reading of Kierkegaard. It was offered as a kind of, like you say, Tom, a kind of assistance, a benefit, and encouragement to what I saw as a real need in broader culture, especially in an era of Trump and despair and COVID and all this, right? And so one of the worries I do have, Tom, with the linguistic differences and I think some of the metaphysical and substantive differences is that I think you compellingly write for a popular audience, which I applaud and find unbelievably courageous, right? I am trying to develop the same virtue, my friend. However, I think you try to keep a foot in both camps while doing so. And for me, that's the move that makes some of this stuff at least complicated, if not necessarily like missing the target, right? Because the thing that gets picked up and celebrated on Facebook, and then you've got like all these scholars saying, wait a minute, this is bonkers. Like we refuted that 13 years ago, but you're not talking to that audience. So anyway, a critique and a sort of celebration of your work is, man, I just don't know if we can have a foot in both camps in the same texts. I really do think we need to kind of be saying, look, when I'm talking about, amipotence, I'm not doing this as a argument against what philosophers call omnipotence. I'm doing this as a new suggestion that maybe a lot of people who have been harmed by these ideas can benefit from. And then when we come swinging, you're like, dudes, what the heck? Like that's not at all what I'm up to, right? So maybe for me, that's also what's at stake here is what audience and when audience. And I think sometimes, Trip Fuller, for example, I think is almost always speaking to a popular audience. I'm always speaking to an academic audience and then have tried to bridge. I think, Tom, you always speak to both. And in speaking to both, it's almost like trying to run a marathon with a parachute on, right?
Yeah, it's very difficult.
Yeah, I do have to go. Tom, did you want to respond anything more to that really quickly?
No, I think I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate Nick and Josh and Aaron, and also you, Joshua and Noel, putting this together. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, in wrapping it up, we're going to do everything a little bit unconventional because I really do have to go. We're going to do recommendations like this was a different podcast and not God Moments. And I have really specific criteria for everyone's recommendation except for my own because I'm cheating. My recommendation is that all of us get back together and do an episode on a character that Nick left out of his essay. Nick should have brought up Mr. Purple from Jessica Jones, whose entire ability is to control people by speaking. And it's an entire character revolved around the idea of controlling. And I think the reason that Tom would find it interesting, even though maybe you're not super into pop culture, he has a statement in one of the episodes of Jessica Jones where he says he was never really sure if anyone actually loved him because they had to do what he said. And I think there's some serious theological implications of what we believe about God's ability to control in that sentiment that it would be really fun for the five of us to talk about.
Nice.
So that's my recommendation. Everybody else's recommendation has to be a book that you don't agree with, but still enjoyed reading and are okay recommending to other people. So really quick, just the name of the book and title, no explanation. Everybody will just know you don't agree with it, but you still think it's worth reading. I'm going to put Nick on the spot because he's the man. He can do it. I believe in him. All right, Nick.
Somebody's book that I think people should read is R.T. Mullins, who also contributed to the book. I listened to his podcast as well. But he wrote a book. Is it a small book about a big God? Is that a recent book? Does everyone know that? Anyway, I think the book came out. It's good. There's some things that I agree with and some things, oh, look, there we go. I like it. Josh Patterson just pulled it up.
Of course he
R.T.
did.
Mullins challenges me. He's hilarious, and he's like stupid smart. And so I would say go read that book.
All right. Aaron, name and title, no explanation. People just know it's something you don't agree with, but you still recommend.
Reasonable Atheism by Scott Aiken and Rob Talese.
I am I lied earlier. I'm gonna do my own recommendation. The Death of Omnipotence, the Birth of Amipotence is my recommendation. Someone I didn't agree with, but I like the book. All right, Josh.
Yeah, so shout out. This person wrote a chapter in the Amipotence volume, and they wrote a book, and I disagree with both of them. It's my buddy Gabriel Gordon, good friend, and his book is called The Fundamentals of a Recovering Fundamentalist.
Ooh, I love it. All right, Tom, bring us home.
Well, at lunch today, I was reading an older book that I'll throw out there called God as the Mystery of the World by Gerhard Ebeling. The guy can't write. He sucks as a writer. Absolutely sucks. But he's got some really great points here and there that I like and other things I don't like. So there's my recommendation.
I love it. Well, guys, check these books out. Check out Amipotence Volume 1 and 2. That's Amipotence Support and Criticism and Amipotence Expansion and Application. Check out all of these guys. I'll do a bunch of links and stuff down below. It'll be great. Make sure you check out our Patreon. All the stuff that TJ wants me to say. Share it with a friend, enemy, cousin, etc. Bring the channel beyond eventually. I think next week we're talking about Indigo Color of Grief. That'll be cool. Yeah, Jonathan Foster. Yeah, there we go. I did part of the outro correctly. The rest of it, that's on you, listeners. Thank you guys for listening. See you again
Joshua.
Wednesday. All right. Thank you. All right. See you guys.